I never imagined I'd be facing a situation like this, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. It all started at our housewarming party, where Claire was being celebrated by her family and mine. She had just received a huge promotion at work, and it wasn't just the new title that everyone was excited about. It was the significant pay raise that came with it. I could see how much it meant to her, how proud she was of herself, and honestly, I was proud of her too. She worked hard for this. We were surrounded by family, celebrating the moment, when I noticed my mother eyeing the situation. It's hard to explain, but whenever Claire and I were doing well, my mother seemed to have this way of making everything about herself. When Claire mentioned her new salary, I saw the wheels turning in my mother's mind. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was just being her usual self, making comments here and there, as she always did. But a few days later, things took a turn. My mother pulled Claire aside when we were at my parents' house, casually asking about how much Claire was making now that she had her promotion. It seemed harmless enough at first, but I knew my mother too well to miss the calculating look in her eyes. She wasn't just interested in the numbers. She had a purpose. Claire was hesitant to share specifics, but my mother kept pressing. That was when Claire told her, and I could see the shift in my mother's demeanor. Something was off. I didn't know what exactly, but I had a bad feeling about it. I didn't realize it at the time, but the request my mother was about to make would change everything. A few days after that conversation, my mother asked Claire if she could help pay for my sister Emma's college expenses. She didn't frame it as a request, but more as a simple favor, one that would help the family. It was said so casually, but the weight of it hit Claire like a ton of bricks. My mother didn't even try to hide the sense of entitlement in her voice. Claire was taken aback. She was a generous person, but this felt wrong. I watched her, knowing that she was trying to process the request, trying to decide how to respond. And then, without hesitation, Claire turned her down. She had every right to. She didn't owe anyone anything, especially not after everything she had worked for. I was proud of her for standing up for herself, but I also knew that my mother wouldn't take it well. She never did when things didn't go her way. I was torn in that moment. I didn't want to put Claire in a difficult position. I wasn't about to ask her for money, and I definitely wasn't going to pressure her to do something she didn't feel comfortable with. But at the same time, I had grown up with my mother's manipulations, and I knew what was coming next. I didn't expect her to react the way she did, but I should have known better. The next day, when we were at home, I could feel the tension in the air. My mother had clearly taken the rejection hard, but I never expected her to go as far as she did. What happened next would leave me stunned, shocked, and questioning everything I thought I knew about my family. I was cleaning up after dinner when I heard raised voices from the living room. I rushed in to find Claire and my mother in the middle of a heated argument. My mother was yelling, calling Claire selfish and accusing her of ruining everything. She blamed Claire for everything, for not caring about family, for not helping my sister, and for being a gold digger who was only concerned about her career and money. I stood there in shock, unable to move. I had never seen my mother like this. The venom in her voice was palpable. Claire, you're nothing but a selfish, fake woman who's here to destroy everything. You've made my son move away from his family. You've made him forget where he came from. And now, you won't even help your sister? What kind of person are you? My mother's words cut through the air like a knife. I was frozen, my chest tightening. I couldn't understand what had caused her to lash out like this. I wanted to stop it, to make her understand how wrong she was. But before I could speak up, my father stepped in. He intervened with a calm but firm voice, one that immediately commanded attention. "That's enough, Diane," he said, before turning to Claire and me. "I need to explain something to you both. You need to hear my side of the story before things get any worse." I looked at my father, unsure of what was happening. What could possibly be his side? My mother had made it clear how she felt, and her words couldn't be taken back. I thought I knew my parents, but now everything felt like it was unraveling in front of me. My father motioned for us to sit down. We all gathered around the living room, still in shock from my mother's outburst. He took a deep breath, looking at both Claire and me, before finally speaking. "I need you to understand that what your mother did wasn't just about the money. It goes much deeper than that. You see, a few years ago, your mother tried to ruin your marriage, Ethan. She tried to destroy you and Claire. She orchestrated an affair that nearly tore you both apart." I stared at him, utterly speechless. The words felt like they didn't belong in this reality. An affair. My mother had tried to ruin my marriage. What was he talking about? Your mother encouraged a woman from the company to pursue you, Ethan. She even threatened her job to make sure she did. She thought it would drive a wedge between you and Claire and that she would have you back, all to herself, he continued, his voice steady but filled with a sadness I hadn't expected. The revelation hit me hard. My mother, the woman I had always trusted, had done this? And my father had been the one to cover it up, paying off the woman to keep everything quiet. I felt like the ground was slipping beneath me, and I struggled to process it all. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice shaking. I didn't want to burden you, my father said, his face etched with regret. But the damage was done. Your mother's actions drained your sister's college fund to settle the woman's claims. We've all been paying the price for years. The truth, ugly and raw, had finally come to light. I felt a rush of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. My mother had manipulated not just me, but my entire family. All this time, I had thought she was the matriarch holding us together, but now I saw her for what she truly was. The days following my promotion were a whirlwind. I could barely catch my breath after the big announcement at work, but we were hosting a party to celebrate the milestone. It was a joyful occasion, a moment of pride for me, especially since it came with a significant pay raise. My husband Mark and I invited our families over to share the good news. Of course, the usual congratulations came pouring in, but there was something more to this celebration than I had anticipated. The first real question out of my mother-in-law's mouth was blunt. How much are you making now? I'll admit I was a little smug about answering her. It felt good to share something positive about myself, especially when I knew she didn't have the best feelings toward me. She had always looked at me with judgment, but in that moment, I figured, why not? I told her the exact amount, and though I had expected some praise, her reaction was stone-faced. She congratulated me with barely a smile, and that was that. I thought the topic was done and that I could finally enjoy the party. But a few days later, as I was in the middle of hosting the event, she cornered me again. This time, in private, she told me that she had given it some thought. And now, since I was making so much money, she believed it was fair to ask me for a big favor. She wanted me to cover my sister-in-law Emma's college expenses. All of them. Not just tuition, but the entire cost of living too. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My relationship with Emma had always been polite but distant, and we weren't close enough for me to consider helping her with something like this. But even if we were, this wasn't something I had the means to take on, nor was it my responsibility. Her parents should be the ones supporting her, not me. I immediately told her no. She was stunned, and I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. Without a second thought, I stood firm and explained that my new salary didn't mean I was obligated to take care of Emma's expenses. It wasn't even a question of money. I had no desire to get involved in their financial matters, but she didn't take it well. Her voice rose and she told me I was being selfish, that I owed it to the family to step up now that I was doing well for myself. She made me feel as though I was letting everyone down, simply for not agreeing to cover an expense that wasn't mine to take on. I could feel the heat in my cheeks as I stood there. I wasn't about to be guilt-tripped into doing something I didn't feel was right. I told her I wasn't going to entertain this conversation any further and excused myself to go back to the party. But as soon as I walked into the living room, things escalated quickly. My mother-in-law, still furious, started shouting at me in front of everyone, making accusations that left me in shock. She called me selfish and fake and said that she couldn't believe her son had married someone so self-centered. I was frozen, speechless. I had never seen her like this before. Sure, she had made passive-aggressive comments in the past, but nothing had ever been so direct, so hateful. I was embarrassed, humiliated, and angry all at once. It felt as though everything I had done over the years to make things work with her had been thrown back in my face. She told everyone that my marriage to Mark had caused him to cut down on family time and accused me of being the reason he no longer spent as much time with his family. It was always his decision to move to the suburbs after we married, but suddenly, I was the scapegoat for their grievances. Then she went further, saying that I was fake, pretending to get along with everyone while secretly talking badly about them behind their backs. That was simply not true. I didn't speak badly about anyone, especially not her, But the worst part was when she accused me of making my husband pay for everything, even though I made more money than he did. It wasn't true. Mark and I split everything fairly. Sometimes he paid, and sometimes I did. There was no always me about it. But my mother-in-law clearly had her own version of events. By this point, I couldn't hold back anymore. I was in complete shock, trying to process everything she was saying. It was like she'd been holding this all in for years, just waiting for the right moment to explode. I wasn't going to engage with her any longer. Just as I was about to respond, my father-in-law stepped in. His voice was calm, but firm as he told her to stop embarrassing herself. He called her out for ruining the party and making a scene. Everyone was silent at that moment, trying to process what had just happened. It was clear that nobody understood where this was coming from. I thought the situation might end there, but then my father-in-law said something I didn't expect. He took the opportunity to reveal something shocking, something that had been hidden for years. He told everyone that the reason my mother-in-law was so upset with me had nothing to do with college tuition. It was all because of a past mistake of hers. Apparently, my mother-in-law had tried to sabotage my marriage by pushing another woman onto Mark. The revelation left me stunned. Apparently, a woman at Mark's workplace had been flirting with him, despite him being clear that he wasn't interested. But what I didn't know was that my mother-in-law had orchestrated the whole thing. She had actually paid this woman to flirt with my husband, hoping that it would pull him away from me. I was horrified. My mind was spinning, trying to process how far she was willing to go to interfere in our relationship. The whole room was silent, and my mother-in-law began crying, trying to deflect from the situation. But my father-in-law continued to speak, exposing the truth and revealing how he had to pay a settlement to this woman to cover up the mess my mother-in-law had created. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. At that moment, my father-in-law apologized to both Mark and me. He was embarrassed, ashamed even, but he wanted to make things right. But honestly, the damage was done. I didn't know how to feel or what to say. The truth was out, and everything had changed. My mother-in-law ran out of the room, but we didn't chase after her. Mark and I sat there in disbelief, processing everything. The evening had started as a celebration but ended in chaos. We decided to cut ties with her, for now at least. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As people started to leave, the weight of what we had learned settled over us. Our celebration had turned into something else entirely, and I knew things would never be the same with my in-laws again. The question now was whether or not we could ever forgive them, and what it would mean for our future. The days following the party were a blur. Mark and I had made a decision to cut ties with my mother-in-law. After what had been revealed, there was no going back. The humiliation, the lies, and the manipulations were too much. We couldn't just pretend things were okay anymore, especially after she had tried to ruin our marriage and had publicly attacked me. It felt like the final straw in a long history of strained relations. But what came next shocked me even more. My father-in-law, despite everything, still believed in trying to make things work. He contacted us several times, asking us to reconsider. He even asked Mark to speak to me, to convince me to forgive his wife. It was clear he was desperate, but for all the wrong reasons. The fact that he couldn't see the depth of the damage caused by his wife's actions made me question his ability to truly understand what we had gone through. Mark and I decided to keep our distance. We didn't want to be dragged back into the toxic family dynamic, but my father-in-law wasn't about to give up. A few days later, he showed up at our doorstep again. His demeanor was different this time. He seemed almost regretful, but it didn't move me. He said my mother-in-law had come to her senses, that she was ready to apologize, and that she had been miserable since the incident at the party. He insisted that we needed to talk to her, that we couldn't let this tear the family apart. I wasn't ready to hear any of it. I couldn't bring myself to accept her apology, not yet at least. I had just learned that the woman who had tried to destroy my marriage and manipulated a young woman for her own purposes was now claiming that she was sorry. It felt insincere, as though she was only apologizing because she realized the damage she had caused to her own relationships. My father-in-law's argument that she was ready to do whatever it takes to make things right did nothing to convince me. He didn't seem to understand that the problem wasn't just that she had asked for money. It was that her actions had been so underhanded, so manipulative, that forgiveness wasn't going to come easily. Mark and I discussed it, and we both agreed that it wasn't just about the money or the insults or even the overbearing behavior of my mother-in-law. It was about respect. She had crossed so many lines, and the apology she was offering felt like a Band-Aid on a wound that needed much more healing. I didn't believe it was genuine. It was a quick fix for her to avoid the consequences of her actions. It was a way to put the responsibility back on us, to make us feel guilty for not forgiving her. When they came over to our house for the apology, I could barely look her in the eye. She began crying immediately, telling me that she hadn't meant to hurt me. She said she'd been struggling with the fact that her son had married someone she didn't approve of, and that she hadn't known how to cope with the feelings of rejection. Her excuses didn't move me. She was justifying years of manipulation by claiming she hadn't known how to deal with her emotions. I wasn't buying it. I told her that I appreciated the apology, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't about what had happened that day, or even the party. It was about years of resentment and toxic behavior that had been building up for far too long. The way she had acted during that party, the things she had said, were the culmination of years of hidden animosity. Her behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of a pattern. I told her we needed space to process everything, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. Her husband agreed, but he wasn't as resolute as I was. He tried to make us feel guilty, asking if we were willing to break up the family over something that could be fixed. His tone wasn't hostile, but it was manipulative. He claimed that we couldn't let this one issue destroy everything they had worked for. He tried to twist it into something about family loyalty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his motivation was not about reconciliation. It was about saving face and maintaining the family image. I refused to engage any further. I told them both to leave, that I didn't have the emotional energy to continue this conversation. They argued with Mark, accusing him of being too laid back about the situation, but Mark was firm. He told them it was my house too, and if I wanted them to leave, they had to go. That was when they finally left, and the door closed behind them with a finality that felt almost relieving. It was over, or so I thought. The weeks that followed were quiet. Mark and I tried to focus on our life, our plans for the future, and the joy of just being with each other without the constant pressure from his family. But it wasn't as simple as that. Mark's sister, Emma, had a different take on things. She called him furious, demanding to know why he was letting me treat their mother this way. She claimed I was being unreasonable, that I was the one causing a rift in the family. Her tone was judgmental, as if she didn't understand the full scope of what had happened. I had refused to help her with her college fund, something that had been a point of contention during the party. But now she was accusing me of being disrespectful to their parents. She believed that my refusal to give money to her education was an unforgivable act, and that I needed to do more to help the family. I was angry. But more than that, I was hurt by how little she seemed to understand about the situation. Her priorities were out of touch with reality, and her inability to see what had been done to us was frustrating. She even tried to guilt-trip Mark, calling him weak for not standing up to me. She told him he needed to grow a spine. It was beyond absurd. Mark, however, stood by me. He told her she had no right to get involved, that she didn't understand the full picture, and if she couldn't accept that, he would block her too, which he did. It wasn't the most pleasant way to handle it, but it was clear that she was only making things worse. The whole situation had turned into a battle of sides, Mark and me versus the rest of his family. His sister wasn't backing down, and his parents were still trying to manipulate us into forgiving them. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. But through all of it, Mark and I leaned on each other. We were stronger than I had ever thought possible. He was the best partner I could have asked for, and even though the pressure from his family was mounting, he made it clear that I was his priority. His loyalty to me was unshakable, and for that, I was incredibly grateful. At this point, I was done. I was done trying to fix things for them, done with their games, and done with the constant emotional turmoil. What had started as a simple celebration of my promotion had turned into a full-blown family crisis. But I wasn't going to let it break us. Mark and I had each other, and that was all that mattered. After my father's revelation, everything I thought I knew about my family seemed to shatter in an instant. My mother, the woman I had trusted my entire life, had manipulated us all. I sat there, stunned, struggling to process what he had just told us. The reality of the situation felt surreal. It was one thing to suspect something was wrong, but to hear it all laid out so plainly, it hit me like a wave, knocking the breath out of me. I looked at Claire, who was sitting beside me, her face pale and filled with disbelief. She had never liked my mother, and now it was clear why. I felt like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier. I had been so focused on my mother's disapproval of Claire and her constant criticisms that I had never stopped to question her motives. Now, the truth was in front of me, and it was worse than I could have imagined. "I can't believe this," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. She tried to destroy us?" I nodded, not knowing what else to say. The anger inside me was building, but it was a different kind of anger than I had ever felt. It wasn't just about the betrayal of my marriage, but about the betrayal of my entire family. My mother's actions had not only affected Claire and me, but they had impacted the entire family dynamic in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. My sister Emma's college fund had been drained to cover up the affair, and my parents' marriage had been left in tatters. "Why would she do this?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. Maybe she felt like she had lost control over me, over everything. I don't know, but whatever the reason, it doesn't make sense. It's too much. There was a long silence as we both tried to digest the enormity of what had been revealed. My father sat quietly, his eyes filled with regret. I could tell he felt responsible for not telling me sooner, but at the same time, I understood his hesitation. He had protected the family, keeping the secret buried for years to avoid scandal. But now, it was all out in the open, and we had no choice but to deal with the consequences. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. My father sighed, his face tired and worn. "I don't know, Ethan. I don't know how to fix this. But you have to decide what you're going to do with this information. Your mother, she's not the person you thought she was." I could see the pain in his eyes. He was torn between his loyalty to his wife and the devastation of what she had done. But I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sweep this under the rug or pretend like everything was fine. The damage was too great. I had to stand by Claire, and I had to protect our future, no matter the cost. "I'm done with her," I said, my voice steady. "I can't be part of this anymore. She's crossed a line I can never forgive." Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. She had been through so much with my family, and now, after everything, I could see that she was ready to move on. She didn't want to be part of a family that was this toxic, and I didn't blame her. "I'm with you," Claire said softly. "Whatever you decide, I'll be by your side." That was all I needed to hear. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I had been living in my mother's shadow for far too long, trying to please her, trying to make everything work. But now, I had to choose my own path, with Claire by my side. The family I had once known was no longer the family I had to be a part of. It was time to break free. Later that evening, I had another conversation with my father. I told him that I couldn't continue pretending that everything was fine. I told him that until my mother showed real change, I couldn't be around her. He didn't argue. He understood. It wasn't the way I wanted things to end, but it was the only way forward. The next few weeks were tense. My mother tried to reach out, sending messages and calling, but I ignored every attempt. I couldn't bring myself to engage with her. It wasn't just the affair that broke our bond. It was the years of manipulation, the lies, and the constant undermining of my relationship with Claire. I couldn't let her back into our lives, no matter how much she tried to justify her actions. And yet, even with all the distance, I couldn't completely shut the door. There were moments when I felt guilty for cutting ties with my mother, guilty for not trying to make things right, but deep down, I knew that I had made the right choice. Claire and I were moving forward, and we couldn't allow my mother's toxic behavior to pull us back. A few months passed, and Claire and I focused on building our life together. We were more connected than ever, and the emotional weight of my family's dysfunction began to fade. The silence from my parents continued, but strangely, it felt like a relief. The pressure to live up to their expectations, to appease them, was gone. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't easy. There were days when I missed the family I had once known, when I wished things could be different. But I also knew that sometimes Letting go was the only way to move forward. Eventually, Claire and I decided to start a family of our own. We found out we were pregnant, and the news felt like a fresh start. It was a symbol of the life we had built together, a life free from the toxic influences of my past. And while my parents remained silent, I couldn't have cared less. They weren't part of this new chapter. This was our family, our future, and nothing would stand in the way of it. Looking back on everything, I realized that sometimes you have to walk away from the people who have hurt you, no matter how much you love them. You have to protect the life you've created, and you have to prioritize the people who truly care for you. That's what I did. And in the end, it was the best decision I could have made. It's been a few months since everything went down, and honestly, life is starting to feel like it's getting back on track. The emotional weight of everything, the family drama, the manipulations, the betrayal, has started to lift. Mark and I have worked through everything, and while the scars are still there, we're stronger for it. We're ready to move forward together. In the weeks after the chaos of the party and the fallout with Mark's family, things have quieted down. His parents stopped trying to contact us, and we made it clear to them that we didn't want anything to do with them for now. Mark's sister, Emma, though, still didn't let go of her anger. She kept trying to reach him, sending messages through different accounts, but we both knew her heart wasn't in the right place. She didn't understand the full picture, and honestly, I didn't feel like explaining it to her anymore. It wasn't my responsibility to make her see things from our perspective. She was still siding with her mother, not realizing the full extent of what had happened, and I wasn't going to waste more energy on someone who was more concerned with keeping the peace than understanding the truth. I won't lie. There were times I doubted our decisions. Maybe it would have been easier to just forgive, to give my mother-in-law the chance to explain herself and let it all go. After all, people make mistakes, right? But then I remembered everything that had happened, the lies, the manipulations, the public humiliation at my party, and I knew in my heart that what I was doing was right. I had tried. I had given her the benefit of the doubt for so long, but she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Sometimes you have to protect yourself, even from family. The decision to not let them back into our lives wasn't easy, but it was necessary. We had to rebuild the foundation of our own relationship first. It wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about protecting Mark, too. He deserved better than a family who saw him as a pawn to be used and manipulated. We both needed space to heal and figure out what our future together looked like without the toxic influence of his parents. One of the hardest things for me was knowing how much this was affecting Mark. I could see the guilt on his face every time his dad tried to convince him to reconcile. But Mark wasn't willing to compromise his values. He knew that standing by me, supporting me, was the right thing to do. Even if that meant cutting ties with his family, he made that clear to his father every time. It was clear to both of us now. Mark wasn't just standing by me because I was his wife. He was doing it because he genuinely believed that what his mother had done was wrong, and that it wasn't something that could just be brushed under the rug. We both decided that the next chapter of our lives was going to be about us, about building our own family, our own future, without interference. So when the news came that I was pregnant, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. The future I had imagined for myself was becoming a reality. Mark and I were going to be parents, and nothing, not even his manipulative mother, could take that away from us. We made the announcement to our closest friends and family, but we kept it simple. We didn't want the drama of Mark's side of the family overshadowing this joyful moment. The day we shared the news was a day full of smiles, congratulations, and excitement for what was to come, but it was also a day that marked a final break from the past. We weren't going to let them into our lives. Not now. Not ever. A few days after the announcement, I realized something strange. Mark's parents didn't reach out. Not a single message. No congratulations. No well wishes for the baby. It was bizarre, considering how they used to be. But in a way, it made it easier for me to see that we had made the right decision. They hadn't even tried to acknowledge this huge change in our lives. They were so wrapped up in their own egos that they couldn't even set aside their pride to congratulate their son and daughter-in-law on something so monumental. As time went on, I found myself feeling less and less guilty. The stress of trying to fix things with his family, the pressure to reconcile, had lifted. We were moving forward, without them, and that felt right. Mark and I spent more time focusing on our relationship, on our future, and on the baby. Our bond only grew stronger with every passing day. We were a team, and nothing was going to tear us apart. The closer we got to the birth of our child, the more I realized that this was what truly mattered. Our family was going to be our priority. The drama and pain that Mark's parents had caused would no longer have a place in our lives. We had made our peace with that, and I had made my peace with the fact that sometimes cutting ties with toxic people was the best thing you could do for yourself. I won't lie, it's been hard, but every decision we've made has been for the right reasons. Mark's parents tried to play the victim, to make us feel guilty for standing our ground, but we know the truth. We know what they did, and we know that we didn't deserve any of it. I don't feel bad for not forgiving them. I don't feel bad for cutting them out of our lives. What I feel is proud of the life we've built, proud of Mark for supporting me, and proud that we're about to become parents. It's strange how everything changed in such a short amount of time. What started as a celebration of a promotion turned into a family crisis. But in the end, I think it's all worked out for the best. We're stronger, more united, and ready for the future, no matter what it brings. So here we are, about to become parents with our own little family to care for. I've learned that family doesn't have to mean blood. It's about who stands by you, who supports you, and who lifts you up when you're at your lowest. And for me, that's Mark, our baby, and the people who truly care for us. I can't wait to see what the future holds. We're ready for whatever comes next.